Go back and watch the final 10 minutes of End of Evangelion. The creator being opens its eye, and humanity dissolves into an ocean of orange liquid while Shinji stands on a beach with the species he failed to save. Audiences in 1997 didn't flinch at that imagery, because what they were seeing was theology presented as cinema. The current most consumed long-form storytelling media on Earth made the creator god into the antagonist, and the people that watch it feel vindicated. But why though? That's the question I want to take seriously. Why has God become the villain in most anime, the format hundreds of millions of people watch every week, and why it isn't seen as blasphemy? I want to be clear on my position here. When a culture loses faith that the divine is benevolent, but cannot abandon the idea that the divine is real, the oldest heresy in Christianity comes back. That heresy has a name: Gnosticism. Anime is where Gnosticism is prevalent and where it's surfaced with the least resistance anywhere in the modern world. I'm gonna throw out my theory here and then see how it holds up against the toughest scrutiny I can find. From a Christian point of view, this whole thing just sounds like theodicy bait wrapped up to sound deep. Theodicy, for anyone who doesn't know, is the idea of defending God's goodness in the face of evil. A culture's theodicy is the explanation it gives for why a good God permits a world like this one, with injustice and all kinds of evil running rampant. From a secular point of view, what I'm describing is atheism wearing a theological costume. Both have force behind them, but I'll argue that neither truly explains why audiences feel relief when the creator becomes the enemy. To get my point across, I'll pull from and look at a wide range of sources. Marcion of Sinope, the Roman heretic excommunicated in 144 CE for declaring that the God of Genesis could not be the same being Christ revealed. Hans Jonas, whose 1958 book, The Gnostic Religion, recovered what Marcion and the wider Gnostic movement actually believed once the Nag Hammadi codexes became available for study. Carl Jung, who made the same theological turn in respectable academic German in 1952, and got away with it because nobody reads psychoanalysts as theologians. Philip K. Dick, who experienced the pattern as a vision in February 1974 and called it the Black Iron Prison. Mark Fisher, who in 2009 described what living inside such a prison feels like, without recognizing the theology that fit. And of course, I'll be using an extensive list of anime: Evangelion, Fullmetal Alchemist, Berserk, Made in Abyss, Bleach, Madoka Magica, and more. Now, most people might just consider these examples of edgy storytelling, but to me, they are the surface of something theological that the medium of storytelling, anime, has carried from its inception. I first watched End of Evangelion in my late teens, alone, at 2 in the morning, on a laptop, in a blacked-out bedroom. I remember the scene with Lilith specifically, because I remember exactly how I felt. What I felt was hard to name, but it was something close to relief, but mostly awe. The world in that fiction had not been made by a benevolent father who had his people's interests at heart. Some part of me already suspected this, and watching the show confirm it was the first time fiction had ever told me the truth about my own beliefs. I'm aware that's an alarming sentence, and I'll come back to it. The point of that scene was the message it conveyed, not the mood. Lilith, the second progenitor in Evangelion's cosmology, the source of human life in the show's universe, is rendered without sentimentality. She is the creator, doing what creators in this universe do, which is initiating the dissolution of everything she made. Anno doesn't editorialize, he shows you the act and lets you decide how to respond. What audiences mostly responded with was acceptance. Some hated it and called it the worst ending in anime history, but the show became a landmark anyway. People born after it aired in 1995 know the scene. The image of the creator as the antagonist has propagated outward from Anno's work into an aesthetic that now contains other figures. Bleach's Yuwak, declaring that all things in this world exist to be destroyed. Madoka Magica's Crybaby explaining that human suffering is a renewable energy source for the universe. Chainsaw Man's Makima revealing that the supposed savior was the system itself. Attack on Titan's Ymir, trapping her descendants in cyclical genocide because she could not refuse her king, and a roster that keeps lengthening with every adaptation. Most may say it's coincidence, but it's actually a theology resurfacing. The question is which theology and why it is surfacing now in this medium among these viewers. Let me explain the heresy of Gnosticism properly before going further. After that, I'll show you how directly anime is presenting it. The doctrine of the Gnosticism I'm describing has a long history. It showed up in the 2nd century CE among groups the Proto-Orthodox Church called Gnostics, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. Their central claim was that the material world had been built by a being who was real and powerful but jealous, and who sat far below the highest reality. This being went by several names in the surviving texts. Yaldabaoth in the Apocrypha of John, Saklas in the Gospel of Judas, which surfaced in publication only in 2006. Sometimes it is simply known as Demiurge, from Plato's Timaeus, where the word had originally meant craftsman. What the Gnostics did was take Plato's figure of the Demiurge and reverse its moral polarity. Plato's craftsman is a benevolent shaper of matter according to ideal forms. The Gnostic Demiurge is the same figure, just an evil version. He made the world as a prison, and your job as a soul is to recognize that you are trapped and to escape the trap. Now, what I want to do is use this doctrine as a diagnostic tool. The outline of Gnostic theology is unusual and easy to spot once you know what to look for. The system contains a creator who is powerful and knowable, but morally compromised. Above the creator sits a higher reality which the creator either does not know about or is actively concealing. Souls inside the creator's design are trapped in it without consent. We're all just prisoners of sorts in this world. And the path to liberation is through knowledge, rather than through the orthodox roots of faith or works or grace. The moment of release is the moment you finally see what is happening. Hans Jonas's contribution in The Gnostic Religion was to lift Gnosticism out of the historical thicket of 2nd century sectarian feuds and show people that it could be analyzed as a coherent worldview. He went further than mere analysis. In a famous closing chapter, he argued that Heidegger's existentialism was modern Gnosticism that just goes by another name. That's basically the same stance of an alienated self trapped inside a hostile reality, looking for the gnosis that would set it free. That observation has aged somewhat unevenly, though the test still works. Once you have Jonas's lens, you can spot the Gnostic pattern in anything, including the most popular animation of the last 40 years. I just want to highlight something here for a sec, because it's relevant to how this argument is going to feel. Academic theology and popular theology have become two separate bodies of knowledge that no longer talk to each other. The professional theologians who can spot a Marcionite drift in 5 minutes don't watch the shows that have it. The people who watch the shows have no idea they're consuming a heresy with a 1900-year track record. The same doctrine keeps being reinvented from scratch by writers who don't know they're falling into a tradition. That's part of what makes the Gnostic pattern so visible. Nobody is copying anyone, and yet the same theology keeps emerging because the cultural conditions that produced it the first time are now back. The Nag Hammadi codexes, the 13 leather-bound books dug up near Nag Hammadi, Egypt in December 1945, gave scholars their first direct access to Gnostic primary sources in 15 centuries. Before 1945, most of what was known about Gnosticism came from the writings of its enemies, especially Against Heresies by Irenaeus, composed around 180 CE. The Nag Hammadi discovery changed the field overnight. You could suddenly read the Apocryphon of John in something close to its original form and see that the Gnostics were not the cartoon villains Irenaeus had described. They had a complete theology, one that was built around the claim that the Creator was not on our side. Timing of the rediscovery is itself a small theological event. The codexes came out of the ground in December 1945, 4 months after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in the year the world finished documenting the Holocaust. The Gnostic explanation for evil, which says that the creator of this world may be malevolent or ignorant or both, became available again at the very moment the standard theological explanations for evil were collapsing under the weight of fresh data. I don't believe in cosmic karma, but the timing is still striking. Hideaki Anno was 5 years old when those bombings still defined Japanese public life. Kentaro Miura was born in 1966 into the Japan that had absorbed those events as a cultural foundation. Yoshiyuki Tomino, Mamoru Oshii, Satoshi Kon, Hayao Miyazaki, every major figure of post-war Japanese animation grew up downstream of an event that broke the moral logic of the universe their parents had inherited. The anime they made all have that break in its theology. What I'm really trying to say is that anime executed the turn to Gnosticism earlier and more overtly than Western fiction because Japan had the religious vacuum first, and a different relationship to the divine to begin with. Before I jump into the cultural side of this debate, I need to give you the philosophy in slightly more detail. Marcion of Sinope is one of the strangest figures in early Christian history. He was a wealthy shipowner from Pontus on the southern coast of the Black Sea, who arrived in Rome around 140 CE and made a substantial donation to the church there. The figure Tertullian gives is 200,000 sesterces, though the numbers in these sources are unreliable. Marcion was a serious Christian who had reached a serious theological conclusion that the church would refuse. He claimed that the God of the Hebrew Bible and the God Christ revealed could not be the same being. The Hebrew God demanded blood sacrifice, drowned populations, hardened Pharaoh's hearts so that he could destroy them, commanded the slaughter of the Amalekites down to the children and infants. The God Christ revealed was a stranger to all of that, a being of love and mercy whom no one had seen before. For Marcion, the only coherent conclusion was that these were two different deities. The Hebrew God was the Demiurge, the just but jealous lawgiver who had created the material world. The God of Christ was a higher and previously unknown God, the loving Father, who had sent his Son to rescue souls from the Demiurge's jurisdiction. The church in Rome excommunicated Marcion in July 144 CE. They returned his money, and he went on to found a parallel church that spread rapidly through the Mediterranean and survived in some regions until the 5th century. His New Testament, the first compiled canon in Christian history, consisting of an edited Luke and 10 Pauline epistles, was thrown out and reconstructed by the proto-Orthodox into the canon that exists today. Irenaeus spent the next 40 years arguing against him. Tertullian wrote 5 books titled Against Marcion that are the main reason we know what Marcion taught at all. I find the politics of this fascinating, and I want to pause on it. Marcion was not crushed because he was wrong in some philosophical sense. He was crushed because his theology, if accepted, would have severed Christianity from its Jewish roots and from the Hebrew Bible, which would have left the new religion floating without a historical anchor in antiquity. The institutional decision to keep the Hebrew Bible was strategic as much as theological. The cost of that decision was that the church inherited the textual evidence for a violent, jealous, partial creator God, and had to spend the next 18 centuries explaining him. The Gnostic systems went further than Marcion ever did. They produced elaborate cosmologies in which the high God was so distant that he was almost incomprehensible, dwelling in what they called the pleroma, the realm of fullness, populated by emanations called aeons. One of these aeons, named Sophia, either fell or strayed and gave birth without her consort's participation to a being she had not intended. This being was Yaldabaoth, sometimes called Samael or Saklas. He was ugly and ignorant and also jealous, and he created the material world without knowing there was anything above him. In the Apocryphon of John, Yaldabaoth declares, "I am God, and there is no other besides me." The text presents this as the line of an ignorant being who has not yet looked up. That declaration, the creator claiming the highest place while a higher reality watches, is the blueprint I want you to keep in mind. Because it is a line that recurs through anime cosmology, often without the writers ever having heard of Yaldabaoth. Take the anime Full Metal Alchemist, for example. In Hiromu Arakawa's manga, completed in 2010, the central villain is named Father. He is a homunculus, an artificial being created from a piece of an entity that calls itself the Dwarf in the Flask. The dwarf wants to escape the material limits of his existence by absorbing God, the actual highest reality of the FMA universe, which the show calls the truth. Father succeeds in his goal of absorbing God, briefly. Then the truth, embodied as a featureless white silhouette at the gate of all knowledge, takes everything back and casts him into nothingness for the crime of attempting something that no created being should have attempted. The whole setup is Gnostic in a sense that most viewers don't even notice. Father is the Demiurge figure, the created being who tries to become the highest reality but fails. Above him is a higher truth that watches and is willing to act. Alchemy is the knowledge that lets initiates partially escape the limits the Demiurge imposes. Equivalent exchange, the show's central rule, becomes the secular version of what the Gnostics called gnosis, which is the price of seeing clearly. What I find compelling about Full Metal Alchemist is that Arakawa, by all evidence, did not set out to write a Gnostic parable. She was writing a story about industrial alchemy and wartime atrocity and brotherhood, with equivalent exchange as the cost of trying to rewrite reality. The Gnostic outline emerged because she was working through the same problem the Gnostics worked through. What happens when a created being discovers that the rules of its world are not benevolent and tries to do something about it? Once you ask that question seriously, the answers begin to become narrower fast. Only so many ways exist to build a story about a creator who is opposed to you. Ergo Proxy, the 2006 series directed by Shuku Murase, did the same move on purpose. The show names Gnosticism in its dialogue and quotes Descartes and Heidegger in title cards. Its plot is built around figures called proxies, created beings who are themselves the creators of post-apocalyptic dome cities. The proxies were built to maintain humanity inside the domes. The show's protagonist, Riel Mayer, gradually discovers that her city's proxy is a malformed creator god who cannot stand sunlight and is dying. The Gnostic language is right on the surface of the show. Most viewers who don't know the source material treat it as set dressing, but it isn't really. Ergo Proxy may be the most academically literate Gnostic anime ever made, but maybe only a few people talk about that aspect of it. I want to push on further now, because once you can see the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. The harder question becomes why. The most overt opposing viewpoint against everything I've said so far comes from traditional Christian theology. The problem of evil is not something new. The Church has been battling it for nearly 2,000 years. Augustine's privation theory says that evil is the absence of good, a corruption of what was originally created good, with nothing positive of its own. Aquinas took this idea further with his free will defense, arguing that the possibility of moral evil is the necessary price for the greater good of true moral agency. John Hick, in the 20th century, developed soul-making theodicy, where suffering is the necessary environment for the cultivation of mature spiritual being. A Christian theologian would say that Gnosticism and its anime conveyors represent a failure of the philosophical nerve. Faced with the problem of evil, the Gnostic doesn't engage with it. They split the deity into a clean good god above and a dirty bad god below, and declare the problem solved by the separation. This doesn't look like theology, more so as psychological refusal hiding behind cosmology. The orthodox theodicies are intellectually serious, and they have answered objections for centuries without simply collapsing. The Gnostic answer does have the profile of an escape from philosophical difficulty, and this is often a sign that the harder work has not been done. The second justification comes from the secular side, and it goes roughly like this. There is no god as villain in anime because there is no god at all. What I'm calling Distheism, which is the belief that the divine is real but not with us, hostile or indifferent, is atheism concealed by theology. The writers of these shows aim for the imagery of malevolent gods because it's dramatically potent, not because they hold any theological position on the actual existence of divine beings. To read Evangelion as theology is to mistake aesthetic furniture for metaphysical commitment. Hideaki Anno has described himself, at various points across 30 years of interviews, as having no fixed religious view. Kentaro Miura, by all accounts, was not a practicing believer of anything. Hiromu Arakawa is the daughter of Hokkaido dairy farmers, and the metaphysical questions in Full Metal Alchemist emerged from secular humanism, not from any institutional theology. First, I'll lay out both criticisms in their strongest, most compelling form before I respond. These are genuine positions, not misrepresentations. The Orthodox Christian is correct that what the Gnostics did can function as an evasion of the harder theodicy problem. The secularist is correct that most anime creators do not hold doctrinal positions on the existence of a malevolent demiurge. And yet, neither argument explains the central phenomenon I'm trying to understand, which is the response of the audience. Audiences are not making theological commitments either, but still they are responding to something that feels true. When they watched Berserk's idea of evil reveal, the audience felt validated and recognized, but not philosophically persuaded. Initially, Miura published the chapter in Young Animal issue 14, then later withdrew it from the collected volume 13 because he felt it gave the cosmology away too soon. Let me describe the scene, because most people have never read it. Griffith, the antagonist who has just sacrificed his entire mercenary company to ascend to godhood, descends through a void filled with the screaming faces of the men and women he murdered. At the bottom of the void, he meets an entity. The entity is a vast mound of pulsing flesh and bone, with thousands of human faces fused into its surface. It tells Griffith what it is, identifying itself as the god of the Berserk world. It was created by humanity's collective unconscious because humans cannot tolerate the idea that suffering is meaningless. They needed a reason, and the reason was created. So humanity willed a god into being to serve as the cause of its suffering because a hostile creator is more bearable than a universe that simply does not care. That's basically the Gnostic claim pushed to its highest point. Miura's god is real in the sense that gods are usually claimed to be real. It exists, it acts on the world, and it has agency. And it is also a human invention, brought into being by collective psychological necessity to fill the role of a cause. Those two viewpoints are not in tension, they are the same claim. The god of the Berserk world is what theology looks like when you cannot stop believing in causation, but cannot accept a benevolent cause. I want to highlight a related point about the Christian canon itself, because I think the Orthodox theodicy argument misses something important. The Hebrew Bible is full of distheist material that professional Christianity refuses to engage with. The imprecatory psalms, the psalms calling for the destruction of one's enemies, including the bashing of their infants against rocks, as in Psalm 137 verse 9, are routinely skipped in liturgy. The Book of Job contains a wager between Yahweh and Satan in which God allows the slaughter of Job's family to win a bet, and the book ends with God's response to Job's complaint, which is essentially that Job has no standing to ask. The traditional Christian interpretation places these texts under the overarching framework of a theology centered on love. The texts themselves are revealing something darker, and Carl Jung saw it clearly in Answer to Job. Jung's argument in that book is distheist in nature underneath the language, though he never used that word specifically. He claimed that the God of the Hebrew Bible was psychologically incomplete and possessed a shadow side. This shadow was active in his treatment of Job. The incarnation could be read as God's response to his own moral incompleteness, an attempt to integrate the shadow by becoming human himself. Jung wrote this in respectable academic German and published it through respectable academic presses. He got away with it because the people who could have stopped him weren't reading psychology books as theological interventions. They should have been, though. Answer to Job is one of the most heretical works of the 20th century. It says, in calm clinical language, that the deity inherited by Christianity has a problem with evil he has not yet resolved. Madoka Magica did the same theological work in anime in 2011. The show's central antagonist, Crybaby, is an alien who travels the universe contracting with girls to become magical warriors. Their suffering, channeled through their transformations into witches when their hope finally collapses, generates energy the universe needs to delay heat death. Crybaby is not evil in the human sense, he is a utilitarian. The suffering he harvests is useful, and the universe will end if it isn't harvested. That is his entire moral operating system. The girl's consent to the contract is technically obtained, even when the consent is obtained through deception. The horror of Crybaby is that he is not a tyrant, but an engineer. The system that requires the harvesting is the actual antagonist, and Crybaby is just doing the job the system rewards. That is a more accurate image of Yaldabaoth than the Gnostics themselves managed. The Demiurge in the Apocryphon of John is ignorant and malicious, but Crybaby is competent and indifferent. The Madoka universe is built so that even compassion, in the form of a single magical girl who wants to save the others, becomes another resource the system can metabolize. Devilman Crybaby, the 2018 Netflix adaptation of Go Nagai's 1972 manga, takes a third angle. In that show, Satan is the secondary protagonist turned sympathetic antagonist. The original heaven cast him out for loving the demons that God created and then abandoned. Satan loves humanity too. Specifically, he loves his friend, Akira, who has been possessed by a demon and become the human-demon hybrid hero of the show. The final episodes of Crybaby reveal that God will destroy the world because the demons, who were always his own creations, have become unmanageable. Satan dies with Akira in his arms on a planet stripped of life. God destroys everything and the show ends. Crybaby is the angriest distheist work I've ever encountered in any medium. It accuses God of cruelty and abandonment in a tone that the Christian canon's own imprecatory psalms only hint at. It does so by inverting the role of Satan into the only character in the cosmology who actually loves. The inversion of good and evil, more than any theological exposition, is what the Gnostic tradition has been pointing at for 2,000 years. The being your religion calls the enemy might be the only character in the story trying to do the right thing. I want to turn this on to you now, because the philosophy stops being interesting if it doesn't connect with your actual life. You watch a character realize that the entity that made the world also rigged it against them, and you don't feel disoriented. You feel acknowledged, and the question is why. Mark Fisher named a piece of the answer in his book Capitalist Realism. Fisher's claim was that contemporary culture has lost the ability to imagine an alternative to the current economic system, and this produces a specific kind of suffering. The sense of being trapped inside a system that is real, that is powerful, that was shaped by no one's particular intention, but which determines almost every feature of your daily life. Fisher was describing late capitalism. He was, without recognizing what he was doing, basically describing the experience of living inside Yaldabaoth's prison. The algorithms that shape your attention. The institutions that score you without explaining the score. The opaque pricing systems that decide your insurance costs, or if you can rent the apartment. The recommendation engines that have a more accurate model of your preferences than you do yourself. The job that consumes your time in service of forces nobody can identify. The notification cycles that have rewired the dopaminergic response of an entire generation. None of this was designed by a malevolent creator with a mustache, and yet all of it functions from the inside like the design of a being who does not have your well-being in mind and does not need to pretend otherwise. Philip K. Dick experienced this directly. In February of 1974, after dental surgery on impacted wisdom teeth, Philip had a series of visions he spent the rest of his life trying to interpret. The visions told him, among other things, that the year was 70 CE, not 1974, and that Christianity had been driven underground by a Roman Empire that had never actually fallen. The appearance of the modern world was a kind of overlay concealing the true situation. He wrote 8,000 pages of journal trying to make sense of these experiences. The journal is called the Exegesis. The key concept that emerges from it is what Philip called the Black Iron Prison. The world, as we experience it, is a prison maintained by a hostile demiurgic intelligence. Most people cannot see the prison, while a few have it revealed to them. The line from his novel Valis, completed in 1981, says, "The empire never ended." Now, I don't claim that Philip K. Dick's visions were veridical in any literal sense. I do, however, claim that he was reporting accurately on what it feels like to live inside a system whose rules are hostile and whose architects are not known. He found Gnostic language because Gnostic language fit the situation he was trying to describe. No contemporary vocabulary did. The Distheist anime god is not a fantasy on a screen. It is documentation of how late modernity feels from the inside. Made in Abyss, the 2017 series adapted from Akihito Tsukushi's manga, makes the documentation almost literal. The Abyss is a vertical hole in the earth that descends thousands of meters into a region of escalating biological strangeness, and it has rules. The most important of them is what the show calls the curse. Descending into the abyss is permitted, but ascending back up triggers progressive physiological damage that increases with the depth you've climbed from. At a certain depth, ascending begins to kill the body. Deeper still, it strips the mind. Past that, ascending leads to something the show calls humanity loss, which Tsukushi renders with the most disturbing imagery I have ever seen. Which is most likely not for people who eat dinner while watching. The curse was not made by a villain. It is the rule of the abyss itself, and the world is built to punish leaving the place that has ruined you. The show's most disturbing antagonist, Bondrewd, is evil, but not in the cackling sense. He is a researcher operating at depths nobody else can survive, using children as experimental subjects because the children's small bodies can take more depth damage before failing. Bondrewd is doing what the Abyss rewards, succeeding inside the system. See, because the horror of his character is that he is right. The system that makes him right is the actual antagonist of the show. Parallels to late capitalism are close enough that they are painful. The people most rewarded by the current system are not always the cruelest, though they are often the ones most fully aligned with what the system actually wants. In the show's logic, Bondrewd's name is indistinguishable from the name of someone good at his job. I want to talk briefly about the algorithm as Demiurge, because I think this is where the analogy stops being a metaphor. When you open a social media app, you are entering a custom-built reality tuned to your historical scrolling behavior. The reality you see has been shaped by a system whose actual goal is hidden from you. Its operators are out of reach, and its decisions about what you should see are made without any resemblance to consent on your end. The system will reward certain emotions in you: outrage, anxiety, comparison, and envy. Because those emotions correlate with continued attention, and attention is the currency the system was built to extract. The Gnostic claim was that the creator of the material world made it to keep you trapped, while convincing you the trap was natural. I cannot think of a more accurate description of an algorithmic feed. Serial Experiments Lain, the 1998 anime directed by Ryutaro Nakamura, anticipated this almost completely. Lain is a 13-year-old girl whose connection to the Wired, which is the show's name for the internet, gradually reveals that she has been the god of the network all along, across every layer of time the show is willing to show you. The show is explicit about it, and humanity's collective consciousness gets channeled through the network on the show's terms. The network required a deity to organize it, and so a deity emerged from the network itself. Lain is the god that lives inside the Wired, not above it. She did not choose this, and she did not want it. By the end of the show, she has erased herself from the world that needed her, because the only way to free people from a god is for the god to refuse to exist. The show aired more than a decade before Twitter and almost 2 decades before TikTok. Its central question, what happens when the collective consciousness of humanity is funneled through a system that requires a god and so produces one, is now the central political question of the 21st century. The answer Lain provides is uncomfortable. The god that emerges from the network is not concerned about us. The system that requires it does not want anything from us. And the only intervention available is to refuse to participate, which is what the Gnostics recommended 2,000 years ago. Sometimes when I'm scrolling and I notice that I can't stop scrolling, I think about Lain. The unease I feel is not Buddhist detachment or Stoic mindfulness. It is closer to Gnostic awareness. The system is real and powerful, but does not love me, and the only escape begins with understanding this. That's the same pattern I keep circling back to. The Gnostic move is a description of what it feels like to live inside a world where the architecture is real, but the architect is not on your side. I feel like I should take a clear position here. The Gnostic return is the predictable theology of any society that can no longer believe in benevolent power, but cannot stop believing in that there is a power itself. The reason anime portrays Gnosticism more completely than Western fiction is that Japan got to the religious vacuum first, by way of a specific historical incident. Japan boldly depicted the divine as an antagonist, since nothing remained that would restrain them. That historical incident has several layers. Shinto, as Japan's indigenous religious system, has always had a different relationship to the moral character of divinity than monotheism does. The kami are not necessarily good or evil. They are powerful, capricious, sometimes generous, sometimes deadly, and worshipping them did not require any belief in their benevolence. Hayao Miyazaki's films keep revisiting this idea constantly. The forest spirit in Princess Mononoke is just that, a forest, which gives life and takes it. There was never a Japanese theological commitment to the inherent goodness of divine beings that needed overturning. Then came the second layer. The first half of the 20th century, ending in 1945 with the nukes and the surrender. The official religious infrastructure of the Japanese state, State Shinto, with the emperor as a living kami, was disestablished by MacArthur on December 15, 1945, with the Shinto Directive. The emperor publicly renounced his divinity on January 1, 1946. The religious center of the Japanese state was officially evacuated within 4 months. After that, the third layer arrived. High-growth materialism through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Post-war Japan rebuilt itself around an economic project that did not require religious justification. The benevolent monotheist god of the West was always a foreign import in Japan, brought in by Jesuits in the 16th century, but was largely suppressed. The post-1945 Japanese cultural inheritance contained no native position on the goodness of the divine that needed defending. By the time Hideaki Anno was making Evangelion in 1995, Japan had a religious lexicon without a benevolent center. The vocabulary was a mix of Shinto, esoteric Buddhism, popular occultism, leftover Christian iconography from the colonial period, and a vague sense that the spiritual world was real. The benevolent center that Western art would have had to negotiate around, the residual Christianity that even atheist Western artists inherit at the level of imagination, was simply not there. That is why anime did the turn first, because there was less to override. The distheist option was available without a fight, because the theology that would have opposed it had been disassembled 40 years earlier. Western fiction has been catching up, slowly and with more friction. Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials is explicitly anti-theist in a Gnostic voice. The authority is a senile false god rather than the true creator, and the protagonist's mission is to kill him. Pullman had to spend years defending the books from religious complaint. Annihilation, Jeff Vandermeer's 2014 novel, describes an Area X that is hostile to human cognition in a way the book treats as fundamentally inhospitable to its inhabitants. The cosmic horror revival in literary fiction circles the Gnostic question without quite landing on it. Writers like Laird Barron and Caitlin R. Kiernan and the broader work coming out of the small press scene nod at the Demiurge without revealing him. None of these Western works has approached the cultural impact of Evangelion, much less the cumulative impact of a 30-year run of distheist anime now extending across dozens of major series. Bleach's Yuak, the antagonist of Tite Kubo's Thousand-Year Blood War arc, gives the most straightforward statement of the doctrine I have found in any medium. His central declaration, "All things in this world exist to be destroyed," is presented as the working principle of the universe his power flows from, rather than as the boast of a villain. Yuak is what God looks like if God's first principle is destruction over creation. The horror of the arc is that he is not wrong inside the universe Kubo has built. The setup is tangible and malicious, and the heroes who oppose him are opposing the rules of reality itself, not just a single bad actor. Attack on Titan's Ymir in Hajime Isayama's manga is the most psychologically painful version of the figure. Ymir was a slave girl who acquired godlike power and used it to serve the king who had enslaved her, and she bore him children. He destroyed her body and made her descendants inherit her power, generation after generation, in a cycle that lasted 2,000 years. The cycle of Titan rage and genocide and reset that drives the show's plot is the consequence of one creator figure's inability to refuse the role she had been given. Ymir is not the antagonist, but she is the trauma at the root of the world. Eren Yeager's final act in the manga, still controversial among fans, is to free her by giving her permission to die. This implication is sad and brutal. The world is built around the unhealed wound of a creator who could not say no to her abuser. Liberation is the granting of permission for the wounded creator to stop existing. Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann by Hiroyuki Imaishi takes a fourth angle and gives the most defiant response. The antagonists of the second half of that show are the anti-spirals, a species of cosmic beings who have decided that other intelligent species in the universe must be limited in their growth. Because unchecked growth leads to a cosmic event called the Spiral Nemesis that will destroy reality itself. The anti-spirals are the gatekeepers of the universe. They have decided that humanity must be contained for humanity's own good. They are perceived as malicious, but they are doing what they see as the necessary work of keeping the cosmos from ending. The show's response to them is the most thrilling refusal in anime. Humanity, led by Simon, decides the cosmic limitation is not acceptable. The anti-spiral's calculation of the good is too small, and the human species will accept the risk of universal destruction in exchange for the right to grow. The final battle is fought across galaxies and through layers of dimensional space, and humanity wins. It is the most defiant possible answer to the distheist setup. If the gods are gatekeepers, then the answer is to break the gate. This brings us back to Carl Jung and to the end of the premise. Let's look back at Carl Jung's book, Answer to Job, again, where he says that the God of the Hebrew Bible has a shadow side where it is evident in his treatment of Job. Jung is careful to frame the argument in psychological language, allowing the church to read it as a comment on the image of God in the human psyche rather than on God himself. Jung is saying that the deity inherited by Christianity is not yet morally complete, and that the religion's central event is the deity's attempt to do its own therapy. Hideaki Anno animated the same thesis 40 years later, in a medium that reached an audience that probably never heard of Carl Jung. In its deepest theological move, Evangelion is the dramatization of Jung's claim. The god of Evangelion's cosmology, Adam and Lilith, and the angels and entities behind Seal, is not the benevolent father. Whatever that god is, it is powerful and partial and not on humanity's side. The Human Instrumentality Project, which is the attempt to fuse all of humanity into a single consciousness, is in part an attempt to do what Jung described God as having attempted by incarnation. It is an attempt to integrate, to stop being divided against itself. My assertion is that every generation gets the theology it can stomach. Medieval Christendom got the absent benevolent father, bridged by saints and rituals because the father was too remote to address directly. The Enlightenment in the Age of Reason got watchmaker deism, where the creator wound up the clock and walked away and would not bother you again. The 19th century got the death of God, declared by Nietzsche in The Gay Science in 1882. The 20th century absorbed the death and tried various replacements: therapeutic culture, political ideology, consumerism, self-help, none of which took hold. The 21st century is getting Yaldabaoth back. We're returning, slowly and across multiple media at once, to a theology in which the creator is real and powerful, but not aligned with us. The reason is that the evidence of our actual lives keeps pointing that way, and the older benevolent theology cannot survive alongside the current systems we now live in. Anime got there first because Japan had nothing holding it back. Now look back at that opening scene. Lilith opens its eye, and humanity dissolves into orange liquid while Shinji stands on a beach with the species he failed to save. You watched it. A lot of people were confused, but you didn't object. The reason you didn't object is because deep down, some part of you already suspected the creator was not a benevolent one. That scene confirmed some of the doubts you had living in the back of your mind. In that world, humanity ended, and the relief you felt from seeing was, after years of being told that the highest reality loved you, fiction told you otherwise. The creator is hostile to our position, and the world we live in is the biggest piece of evidence. Don't get me wrong though, I'm not a believer in Gnosticism. I just call it as I see it, because that suspicion is the oldest heresy in Christianity. The Proto-Orthodox Church spent 4 centuries trying to crush it. Irenaeus wrote Against Heresies in 180 CE specifically to refute it. Tertullian wrote 5 books against Marcion. Augustine wrote his entire mature theology partly in response to the Manichaean Gnosticism he had once belonged to. And the First Council of Constantinople in 381 condemned it. The codices that preserved the Gnostic doctrine had to be hidden in jars in the Egyptian desert by Pachomian monks, because that heresy had been driven underground so thoroughly that for 1500 years almost nobody knew what it had actually said. But now the doctrine of Gnosticism is back. It returns as a shared way of seeing the world, delivered by the most consumed storytelling format on Earth, without church or institutional standing of any kind. Hundreds of millions of people are absorbing distheist theology through anime every week, and most of them have no idea that there is a doctrine or history. They feel that the shows are telling them something the official theology of their culture had been failing to tell them. The implication is that whatever we call divine has to survive contact with the world we actually live in. The benevolent father of high monotheism can no longer survive that contact, so the Gnostics gave us a god who could. A god who is here and who is powerful, but not an ally. A god whose unworthiness is the precondition for the truth-seeing that liberates the soul. I find a strange comfort in this, and I want to be upfront about it. The comfort is not in believing that the world is inherently bad. What it actually is being released from the mental load required to insist that a benevolent designer is in charge of a world that constantly disconfirms him. Theodicy is exhausting, and thinking about it too much is also exhausting. The Gnostic move relieves the exhaustion by accepting what the evidence has been saying. The world is the way it is because it was made by a being who is not what we hoped for. Knowing that does not fix anything, though it does let you stop pretending. And yet, the deeper tension is what worship means once you have made this move. If Yaldabaoth is the only god modernity can still believe in, what do you do with him? Praise is impossible, because there is nothing to praise. Petition is pointless because he is not listening. Rescue cannot be expected because rescue would require a benevolence he does not have. The Gnostics solved this problem by positing a higher god above the Demiurge. They called that higher reality the unknown pleroma and reached toward it through gnosis. Most contemporary distheism does not have a pleroma. It has only the Demiurge, and after the Demiurge, nothing. This is where the philosophy stops being comforting. If there is no higher reality above the malevolent one, the recognition that the world is rigged buys you nothing except the recognition itself. You see the trap, but you cannot escape it. The clearest articulation of this concept in anime may be Texnolize, the 2003 series directed by Hirotsugu Hamazaki. In the series, a city slowly dies and the rest of the world is revealed to be dying with it, from the simple exhaustion of a species that has lost the will to continue. The show ends on the protagonist watching the last lights go out. There is no rescue, only seeing the inescapable trap. I'm not sure if that's better than the benevolent father story, or worse. I'm sure, though, it's where we are. Consider this for a moment. The shows you love, the ones that felt the most impactful and you keep returning to when you trace what they actually argue at the level of theology, is that the creator does not care about you. And you found relief in that argument. You did not find horror. Horror was reserved for the parts of the show that depicted the suffering. The theological setup around the suffering was a comfort. It told you that your sense of having been mispositioned in a hostile reality was correct. That the position was the truth rather than your failure to adjust to a benevolent system you couldn't see. That recognition is the Gnostic recognition, and it has been around for 2,000 years. The early church spent centuries trying to crush it, and now that recognition is back. It's back in the current most popular storytelling format on Earth because the conditions that produced it the first time are now the conditions of our actual lives. I'm not going to question whether you believe any of this. What I want to know is which anime first made you feel that the creator was the villain, and what was already true about your own life that made you ready to accept it. Comment with the name of the anime. Tell me what was happening to you the first time you asked, Why was God the villain in this anime? I'd like to know whether the pattern I think I'm seeing is real,